Merry met, virtual traveller, and welcome to Stories of the Sun, a limited episode podcast created as a companion to the book Stories of the Sun, published by the History Press and written by me, Dawn Nelson, an author and professional storyteller. The idea for this book began when I challenged myself to get up once a month over the year to watch the sunrise in order to reconnect with the sun and its stories. Throughout the 8 episodes, I will include some snippets of audio that I recorded especially for this podcast. This episode explores the ways in which we can greet the sun and take its warmth and fire with us throughout the day. Grab yourself a cuppa, find a comfy spot, and come with me now to my sit spot on the hill. The clouds this morning remind me of a book which I used to read when I was younger, and I can't for the life of me remember what the title of the book was, but it was all about how it was about monsters, but they weren't monsters, they were quite friendly, about how they sit in nature. And there was one whose smoke from his pipe would create the clouds. These are very sort of clear outlined grey clouds against the palest of blue skies. And it's almost like they're ships floating along on the sea. I'm at the top of the field now, along the edge of the woodland, and the mud here has been churned up by riders. I see lots of horseshoe imprints in the mud. It's a stark contrast to the crisp frosty grass just beside it. I'm going to find a spot to stand and drink my coffee. Found a little spot tucked into the edge of the woodland that's not quite so frosty or muddy, because it's always better to sit if you can, because you're standing in the middle of a field. The inhabitants of that field can see you a lot better, as if you sit down, tends to invite them in a little more. And soon you'll hear the chit of birds' alarm calls die down, and they'll all just go back to their usual business. I can see a little pink glow above the clouds to my right, following the line of the national grid. Still got about 10 minutes before the sun will start coming up. According to the Cambridge Dictionary, a sun worshipper is someone who enjoys lying in the sun. The Oxford Dictionary concurs and states it is a person who enjoys lying in the sun very much. And just to be sure, I checked the Collins Dictionary as well, and they say it's someone who enjoys sunbathing, although they note that this could also mean someone who worships the sun as a deity. There are many ways we celebrate the sun, some we may not even be aware of, not just that pursuit of winter sun, as we now call it, or lying on a sunbed in a tropical climate. Simply breaking our fast in the mornings could be seen as not just a necessity but also a ritual, a way of acknowledging the start of the day and giving our bodies the fuel it needs to begin the day. For many of us, the Easter festivities celebrate the life that spring brings with it, and whilst the Christian Church celebrates it as Easter, there are many, as we have seen in the previous episodes, that celebrate the return of the sun in the solstices and the equinoxes. By acknowledging these points in the year, we are also celebrating the sun. There are some who bring the energy of the sun into their everyday practice. An example of this is yoga. In the January chapter of Stories of the Sun, I talk through a sun salutation which can be practiced to greet the sun each day. This is a practice found in Hatha yoga, a style of yoga that is thousands of years old. I talk a little bit more about how yoga came to be practiced in the UK in the book. As yoga has evolved across the world, in the West in particular, the word Hatha has come to mean the sun and the moon, as in Ha for the sun and Tha for the moon. But originally it was a word used to describe a force or energy. Jim Mallinson, a yogi who is passionate about the roots of yoga, talks of how original Hatha yogis would have dedicated their lives to the practice, as a monk may dedicate their life to their faith. You don't have to dedicate your life to Hatha yoga. Some do, but you don't have to. But a sun salutation is a good place to start and an excellent way to stretch in the morning and acknowledge the presence of our largest star, even if she's still hiding behind a thick mist that hugs the downs, as she is from my window today. In various religions across the world, the earth is created in a number of days, and for many the sun is created on the fourth day. It is not a separate entity, though. It is instead a cog in the workings of earth, and in monotheistic faith the human race is protected from its power by one God. This is why Galileo caused such a stir with his heliocentric theories of the 1600s. He was of course correct, that we move around the sun and not the other way around, but you can find more on Galileo's story and his fate in the May chapter of the book. In polytheistic faiths, the sun is not a cog, it is a separate entity, and one that needs to be appeased and worshipped. For the Mexica people, or Aztecs as they were named by the Spanish conquistadors, the creation of the earth took place over several ages, and the sun needed to be kept in check in order for this to happen. I'll talk a little more about this in the next episode though, so let's not get ahead of ourselves. Instead, I'd like to have a look at some prayers, incantations, spells, or however it is that you name the utterance of words and intentions into the earth, and how we may utter these words to the sun. The Carmina Gadelica is a book of hymns and incantations collected in the Highlands and Islands of Scotland by Alexander Carmichael. As those of you who have followed my storytelling for any length of time will know, Scottish stories and lore often sing to my bones, perhaps because my grandfather was a Scotsman through and through. Either way, this book is no different. It's an interesting mix of modern Christian faith and the old ways, a perfect example of the synchronisation of the faiths, rather than a complete and straightforward obliteration of the previous pagan values. Nothing is ever that black and white, right? There are two prayers or incantations that pertain specifically to the sun, and it is the second, number 316, that I would like to share with you. Hail to thee, thou sun of seasons, as thou traverse the skies aloft. Thy steps are strong on the winds of the heavens. Thou art the glorious mother of the stars. Thou liest down in the destructive ocean, without impairment and without fear. Thou risest up on the peaceful wave crest, like a queenly maiden in bloom. I have included the words in the show notes so that you can take a closer look at them, but for me, this describes the wonder of the sun perfectly, and it is these words that I shall leave you with for this episode. You can, of course, create your own prayers and incantations which are personal to you, and in the May chapter of the book I have included my own incantation to Belios or Belinus. He has many different names. He's the Celtic god of the sun, and Danu, the mother goddess. With the celebration of the sun in mind and connection to the land through the sun, throughout the book there are ways to do this, with embroidery, baking, pickling, candle making, meditation, amulets, solar wreaths, and much more. I have also put together a sun celebration sheet as a podcast extra for Substack paid subscribers, which has 7 different ways to celebrate the sun which are not included in the book. For this episode, you can take a look at the June chapter for more on the Keepers of the Sun, the May chapter for Galileo's story plus the incantation to Belinus and Danu, and January's chapter for a little more about yoga and sun salutations. Thanks for joining me for this episode. As always, reviews are enormously helpful. So if you enjoyed this podcast, please leave me a review either on Apple iTunes or via my Facebook. Both are very welcome and really help these stories to travel out into the world and connect with new souls. Stories of the Sun is now available to buy in bookshops. And for more folklore and stories, you can subscribe to my Substack newsletter. Just hop over to the Substack site and search for Ceridwen's Cauldron, or use the link in the show notes. You can upgrade to paid for just £5 a month for an extra dose of wild storytelling to your inbox, which includes podcast extras for Stories from Lore, my other podcast, and Stories of the Sun. Signing up as a paid or free subscriber is much appreciated and helps to support the podcasts and my work with folklore and story. Podcast extras for Stories of the Sun include a full, uninterrupted version of the audio for the sunrise featured at the beginning of this podcast, behind the scenes, journaling activities, and extra stories. You can find me on Instagram as @dd_storyteller, on Facebook as Dee Storyteller, and via Substack as Cerridwen's Cauldron. I hope to see you there, as I'd love to tell you another story. I'll see you next time. Toodle pip.